The history of Westeros is a tale told in thousands of years and pages, one that is both epic in physical size and in hypothetical scope, but one that is also not very easily condensed. Recently I was told by a subscriber that they wanted to get their friends into this beautiful mod, AGOT, for Crusader Kings 3 or A Game of Thrones, but that their friends didn't know or understand any of the lore of A Song of Ice and Fire, and therefore had trouble understanding what was going on. Funny enough, I too have had this issue, and try as I might, I found it difficult in the moment to boil the story down in a way that is easy to understand and digest. With lore videos for each major event, family, or even weapon spanning many minutes if not several hours, and many accompanying theories besides, there is seemingly too much to know for the middlingly interested person. Therefore, in today's video, I'm going to attempt to condense the entire known history of Westeros into an easily consumable video of 3 parts. I do this in hopes that those coming to AGOT for CK3 or even CK2 with no knowledge of the Game of Thrones will have at least a basic understanding to build off of. I have no idea how successful this will be. For my own sake, I plan to start wide and periodically zoom in closer to where we are now at the start of the game in an effort to give you 12,000 years of history in as concise a manner as possible. And by start of the game, I mean the year 282 AC. We'll discuss what AC means in a second. I will be using the wiki and World of Ice and Fire as my primary sources, with a little sprinkle of some Fire and Blood Volume 1 for some Targaryen lore, but really there isn't too much I had to use from that, since I think that first book ends around 160 AC or something, but we'll get to that later. Obviously this is a ton of lore to either gloss over or sprint through, but I'll do my best to cover it as accurately as possible. If for any reason you think I missed something or made an error, feel free to elaborate in the comments. People will want to know as much as possible once they have a good base, and I think it would be useful to share important information. It makes the game more fun when you have a pool to draw from, so you can roleplay as these lords and ladies of the realm. Maybe you can offer something I missed or had to gloss over. But remember, this video is a foundation, not a structure. This will only help you build, but you can't live in it. I'm going to miss a lot of things half intentionally, likely half by accident too. For those who even know a fraction of the lore, this may not prove very helpful, but maybe you'll find it entertaining, who knows. Honestly though, I think that's enough of an intro. This is supposed to be brief, or at least I hope it is. So without further ado, I'm Soul, and this is almost everything you need to know to enjoy the mod AGOT for CK3. Rolls right off the tongue, doesn't it? Also, this probably goes without saying, but spoilers for a lot of stuff, obviously. And before we begin, I will be using this map behind my helpful maester here, which I'll explain what a maester is in a little while, for the majority of this video as a geographic reference. For those unfamiliar, when I speak of Westeros, I'm talking about this landmass on the left, or to the west, and this other landmass here to the east is called Essos. The sea between, as you can see, is quite narrow, and you guessed it, is called the Narrow Sea. Yeah, it's that simple. Anyway, let's begin. Okay, so maybe this isn't terribly important to know if you're just playing the game, but I think you should know that most humans of Westeros are descended from 3 ethnic groups, those being the First Men, the Andals, and the Rhoynar. These are important because when a king is anointed at the High Sept, they are usually anointed as the lord of these 3, and I believe it is the Rhoynar, the Andals, and the First Men in reverse order from when they came. But each came to Westeros in about a 10,000-ish year period. There are technically also Valyrians in the region, although it's hard to gauge when exactly they arrived. At most, I would say maybe 400 or 500 years BC, due to the construction of Dragonstone in 314 BC, but for the sake of this video, I'm going to again get to the Valyrians later. The first of these ethnic groups that we know to arrive in Westeros were the First Men in an era known as the Dawn Age, which was roughly 12,000 years before a guy named Aegon Targaryen decided to conquer the 7 kingdoms. Or 12,000 years before conquest, which is what Westeros' maesters, or the people who write histories in this world, or this little guy you see here in the corner, this is what they use as their BCE equivalent, just for reference in the future when I say BC. And when I say AC, I mean after conquest. So there you go. The how or why the First Men came isn't as important as knowing that before the First Men, there were beings known as the Children of the Forest and Giants, as well as a few other magical creatures who seemingly worshipped the land and lived in relative symbiosis with it. But as it happens, when invading nomadic peoples meet, it does not make for happy times, and the original inhabitants of Westeros were largely slaughtered, forced to move, and eventually settled with, in an event known as the Pact, which secured 4,000 years of peace between the First Men and the Children of the Forest, and began what is known as the Age of Heroes. The Children of the Forest afterwards taught the First Men about their gods, known today as the Old Gods, and how to grow heart or were trees in their honor. They also showed humans how to use ravens to communicate, but back in those days the ravens still talked. Now we just use them as letter carriers, I'm pretty sure. Anyway, most houses of the north, as well as a few major and minor houses dotted throughout the realm, still worship the old gods, or at the very least have weird trees within their settlements. Garden, the capital of the Reach, has 3 such trees within their walls, even though they don't worship the old gods, for example. We'll get to why many others don't have weird trees or worship the old gods anymore in a second. But first, let's talk about the Age of Heroes that followed the Dawn, which was a period where many famous people in the lore, from the mythical King Garth Greenhand, who many houses in the Reach claim descent from, including the original Reach kings of House Gardner, to Bran the Builder, who founded House Stark and built places like Storm's End and the Wall, supposedly existed. It's also important to pause here and mention that the Wall, which you'll undoubtedly notice on the map, was built because of an event known as the Long Night, a multi-generational winter and invasion of beings called the Others, who were defeated in an event known as the Battle for the Dawn, roughly 7,000 years before conquest. Bran the Builder, along with the children, first men, and giants, then built the wall and its castles in preparation for the Others' inevitable return, or so they say. Bran also christened his new House Stark with the words that serve as a grim reminder of that inevitable future conflict. Winter is coming. The Night's Watch, who nowadays mostly live here in Castle Black and sprinkled throughout the other castles along the wall, was founded for the purpose of maintaining the wall and the watch. This was originally probably a huge honor, but their ranks have dwindled significantly since, and they are now mostly made up of criminals and banished lords. Anyway, many major houses, castles, and structures of Westeros owe their origin to this Age of Heroes period, from Casterly Rock to Winterfell. It was basically, barring the Long Night, a golden age of first men ingenuity and craftsmanship when they completed many of their finest works. The next group of humans that came were the Andals, a warlike people from Essos, who brought with them their religion known as the Faith of the Seven. In fact, they painted it on their sails. The Faith of the Seven is the major religion that most houses, major and minor, today worship, except for the houses in the north and on the Iron Islands who worship a drowned god who's sort of like Cthulhu. You'll see in-game that the Faith of the Seven is the main religion of the continents. I won't get into the hows and whys of how it works too much because I feel like it's fairly self-explanatory from a gameplay perspective. It's religion. They worship 7 deities and are run much like the Catholic Church, with a high septon being like a pope, and with its own hierarchy trickling down from lords, septons, all the way down into just a village septon. The high septon, among other things, usually crowns the kings of the 7 kingdoms as well, but as always there's way more to it than that, but that's all you really need to know for a beginner. The Andals' coming took place roughly 6,000 years before conquest, and much like the first men before them, they decimated the inhabitants, conquering much below the northern kingdoms. They burned weird trees and destroyed some houses, including those of House Mud in the Riverlands, but they also intermarried and made peace with other houses like House Gardner of the Reach. But generally speaking, they claimed much of the continent for their own, meaning most major houses besides those in Dorne and the north are descended from Andals and First Men. This is also a period when most of the magical beings of Westeros left for north of the Wall to avoid further decimation with the erratic migration of warlike humans. I don't blame them. Really, you don't need to know as much about this period besides that it happened, that the Andals were incredibly successful in their invasions and slew many former kings, and that the only region they struggled to integrate with besides the north was Dorne, who remained fragmented and bickering with Andal and First Men, begrudgingly coinciding rather than assimilating with each other, which is a common Dornish trend. The Andals' descendants, like the First Men before them, also built great structures like the Eyrie in the Vale and River Run in the Riverlands. The last of these ethnic groups to arrive were the Rhoynar, who didn't arrive until many years after the Andals, about 1,000 to 700 years before Aegon's conquest. Basically, this was another group from Essos who, instead of invading, had fled their home after many years of war with the Valyrians, ironically enough, and had landed in Dorne, a poor, unrefined land of petty kings and bandits at the time. Once there, they naturally found it ripe for the taking. Their queen, Nymeria, and her supposed army of 10,000 ships subsequently married a Martell of the Sand ship, which today is located in Sunspear in Dorne, and with their combined power in an event known as Nymeria's War, the petty kings of Dorne fell one by one until only House Ironwood, the greatest of Dorne's petty kings, remained. The war with the Ironwoods lasted 11 years, but their eventual defeat and banishment of their king led to the founding of the Principality of Dorne, not a kingdom, which is an important distinction. No one has ever been able to claim the High Kingdom of Dorne, and none likely ever will. But Dorne, for its part, remained a tumultuous place even after this new change, and one that did not bend the knee easily to anyone, as we will soon find. There's a lot more about each of these periods you could look into, but really this is the most basic overview I think I can give. I've probably spent too much time already, if I'm being honest. The Age of Heroes in particular is very interesting and obscure and mythical to me, but it would take a series of videos to examine it all. Something we don't have time for, because now it's time for us to talk about the Valyrians and their conquest of Westeros. Now, this section worries me because I just know someone is going to say I was silly not to mention something like the Council of 101 or acts of this or that king or whatever. But I made my bed, so I'm going to lie in it, and I'm going to hope for the best. I'm going to hope that I included all the things I should have included. But before we even explore this history and these people, we should probably briefly talk about who the Valyrians are and go from there. The Valyrians are an ethnic group of humans who typically have silver hair and purple eyes. They are also known, generally speaking, to be quite beautiful. There are technically non-Valyrians who also have these dramatic features like the Danes of Dorne, but I'm not going to muddy the waters with too much of that in this video. Valyrians originally hail from Essos in the Valyrian Peninsula and once ruled a great kingdom known as the Valyrian Freehold, which spanned most of Essos. Originally they were farmers, until they discovered and later tamed dragons with the power of ancient magic taught to them long ago. Some believe it was blood magic, but none can really say. With these powerful allies, the Valyrians founded and maintained their power over the region for what was several thousand years. They also, and this is important to note, practiced incestuous marriage as a way to hold their blood not only above the common people, but to maintain their ability to ride and control dragons, or so they believe. Even with this in mind, it's also important to remember that while they didn't commonly marry outside of their family originally, they did practice this much more frequently when they came to Westeros, with some Westerosi houses like the Baratheons being directly descended from a Valyrian. There's a lot of other history in there that we could talk about, but it's not really important for you to know at a basic level. All you need to know is that this Valyrian freehold came to an end in a mysterious cataclysmic event known as the Doom, which destroyed Old Valyria, killed most of the dragons, and destroyed pretty much all of the Valyrian houses and kicked off what is known as the Century of Blood, where, in the ashes of Valyria's fall, the city-states of Essos broke free of one another and became independent free cities, like Braavos, where, among other things, the strongest and most secretive bank in the entire world operates, the Iron Bank. This will be more important when Essos is added to the mod because you'll get to see those city-states in game, so for now I'll just leave it at that. As far as the Doom goes, think Pompeii, but instead of one volcano, it was 14. Many great arts were lost in the Doom, including the knowledge of how to forge Valyrian steel, which, besides being incredibly strong and beautiful blades, are why the weapons are so coveted now. Anyway, Valyrians have been in Westeros for at least a few hundred years before the Doom, having established a base of operations on Dragonstone and building the fortress there around 314 BC, which I mentioned previously. The seafaring House Velaryon, or I should say Velaryon, of Driftmark likely arrived even before this, so it's unclear where we can pin down the exact arrival date. Personally, I'd guess maybe around 400 or 500 BC, but again, who's to say? Only George probably knows. The Targaryens, thanks to a prophetic dream of Valyria's destruction, moved to Dragonstone around 114 BC, or 12 years before the Doom, and became the only Dragon Lords of Valyria to survive the Doom, which has been confirmed by George. The only other remaining Valyrian house that survived besides the Targaryens and the Velaryons are the Celtigars of Claw Island, who we don't know too much about, but seem to be more economically focused than their sea and sky-wearing cousins, as many of their members later served as masters of coins for the realm. Obviously, there's a bunch happening in Westeros during all this time. The Velaryons didn't really care too much about Westeros as they were more concerned about the fall of Valyria, but we're going to fast forward to about 100 years later in the year 2 BC, when Dragon Rider and Lord of Dragonstone, Aegon the Conqueror, decided he would unite the Seven Kingdoms into one. With his dragon Balerion the Black Dread, an enormous dragon who dwarfed all who came after, his dragon-riding sisters and queens Visenya and Rhaenys, his Valyrian sword, Blackfire, and a host from Dragonstone, Aegon landed in Westeros in 2 BC and constructed the palisade fortress of Aegon's Fort, which would later be the site of King's Landing and the Red Keep. Over the next 2 years, Aegon and his queens brought 6 of the 7 kingdoms to heel, using their surrendered swords and the power of Balerion's dragon flame to forge the Iron Throne, which all kings thereafter would sit. In the end, only Dorne remained independent, though Aegon would attempt to invade Dorne again with hopes of conquest, losing his youngest sister and wife Rhaenys and her dragon Meraxes in the process. The two realms brokered peace in 13 AC to avoid further bloodshed. Although another Targaryen king would try to capture Dorne in 157 AC, Dorne would have actually remained independent until about 187, when King Daeron II's sister, Princess Daenerys, married the Lord of Dorne, Prince Meryn Martell, thus peacefully bringing Dorne into the fold. Following his agreement with Dorne, Aegon ruled in relative peace until his death. He, among many things, founded the Kingsguard, a group of 7 skilled knights from around the realm who swore oaths to the crown in lieu of titles or bearing children. King's Landing, the seat of his power, grew from a small village to the 3rd largest city in the realm and its capital in the span of about 25 years. The Red Keep, however, would not begin construction until near the end of Aegon's rule, or be completed until after his death. So the Conqueror split his time between the city, Dragonstone, and the realm, which he toured annually until his final years. So now the Targaryens sit in the Iron Throne and rule Westeros. There's about 280-ish more years of this to come, several of which are quite bloody while others are quite peaceful and prosperous. But the next major event I think you should probably know about is about another 100 years later, and it's known as the Dance of the Dragons, the first realm-wide civil war and the history of the Seven Kingdoms. The dance began in 129 AC and was fought between Princess Rhaenyra of the Blacks and her half-brother Aegon II Targaryen of the Greens. Princess Rhaenyra was her father King Viserys' intended heir when he died, but the title was usurped by Queen Alicent Hightower, Aegon II's mother and Viserys' second wife, during a small council meeting, a meeting of those selected by the king to rule matters of state, such as the Master of Coin or the Hand of the King. During this meeting, Queen Alicent and her favorite Kingsguard, Sir Christian Cole, essentially used violence to coerce those present to Aegon's side following the king's death. Aegon II was quickly crowned in the dragon pits for all the realm to see, in an effort to quickly delegitimize Rhaenyra's claim. This usurpation happened in part because Rhaenyra did not live in King's Landing when Viserys died, and instead lived with her husband and uncle, Daemon, or the Rogue Prince, as he is sometimes called, on Dragonstone. The family was awaiting the birth of Rhaenyra's sixth child, and as a result found out about Viserys' death and Aegon's subsequent coronation much later. Princess Rhaenyra was herself crowned by her husband with her father's crown, and for the next 2 years the two factions would battle across the Seven Kingdoms. The dance was a brutal and bloody affair, leading to both monarchs and a lot of their children and most of the Targaryens' dragons dying, thus dramatically diminishing the house's previous power and prestige. But in the end, King Aegon III, son of Rhaenyra and Daemon, would be crowned king. As a result of the dance, the last dragon, a small and underdeveloped thing, died in 153 AC under the rule of the same King Aegon III. Giving him his subsequent nickname, Dragon's Bane. Leaving behind only a few eggs, which the family failed to hatch, the age of dragons, as it were, ended. What follows here is a steady decline in stability for the crown and several civil wars known as the Blackfyre Rebellions, of which there were 5, from 196 to 260 AC. These were originally fought by the legitimized bastards of a guy called King Aegon IV, or Aegon the Unworthy, who fathered dozens upon dozens of illegitimate children, who he, to the detriment of the realm, legitimized upon his death. The first and most successful of these rebellions was fought by Aegon's bastard son, Prince Daemon I Blackfyre, a name he took from Aegon the Conqueror's legendary sword, alongside his half-brother Prince Aegor Bittersteel Rivers. These two and their supporters fought against their half-brother Prince Brynden Bloodraven Rivers, and King Daeron II, also known as the Good, the same Daeron I mentioned previously who brought Dorne into the Seven Kingdoms. Although the Blackfyre leaders would change in each war, they would lose each time, with many of the lords who supported them fleeing to Essos with Bittersteel to found the greatest mercenary company in the world, the Golden Company. Bittersteel, interestingly enough, took the Valyrian steelsword Blackfyre with him following his brother Daemon's death by their brother Bloodraven, who himself wielded the ancient Valyrian sword Darksister. Bittersteel and Bloodraven had an awful rivalry and despised one another. The two would duel at least twice, with Bittersteel cutting out Bloodraven's eye in the first exchange, but with Bloodraven ultimately triumphing in the wars they fought against one another. Bittersteel eventually died in battle as a mercenary at the age of 69, his head cast in solid gold so that one day if the Golden Company were to take the Iron Throne for the Blackfyres, he would be there to witness it. His half-brother, Bloodraven, would become the Three-Eyed Raven and live still north of the Wall as a near-immortal servant of the old gods. Although the Blackfyres were defeated, the last of their male line slain in a battle by the Kingsguard Sir Barristan Selmy, some say another contender now rides with the company under the name of Aegon. Some say he is the true son of the late king, whisked away by those loyal to the Red Dragon, yet others say he too is another false dragon, a son of the female Blackfyre line, come to take up arms in their name once more. But that's a little ahead of our story. For those of you who play the mod, well, you'll likely meet him soon enough. Thus concludes part 2 of this video. While there's a lot I left out, I feel pretty good about what I did manage to cover. It was easier than I expected, although I still worry I could have included more, but then again, I want this to be short, right? Next, we zoom in even further and attempt to concisely dissect the motivation behind Robert's rebellion. This part took me the most time to untangle, but I think I got it down fairly well. I hope you enjoy. Now, this section is a little complicated because of how much is going on to cause this rebellion that you'll probably want to know. But for my part, I'm going to attempt to keep it brief and start with an event that took place in 277 AC as my catalyst for things to come, and work from there. The last of the Targaryen kings is King Aerys II, also known as the Mad King, although he wasn't always this way. Sure, a bit paranoid and occasionally erratic, so say the words of Sir Barristan Selmy, Aerys was generally believed to be an initially promising king who suffered from occasional bouts of minor madness. Still, most believe it was an event in 277 that caused this mostly charming and handsome ruler, one famous for his love of maidens and mistresses, to finally go completely mad. This was the Defiance of Duskendale, a rebellion by House Darklyn of Duskendale where they kidnapped the king in an attempt to ransom him for more liberties and wealth, as the house had dwindled much in the years since the rise of King's Landing and ports nearby. Lord of the Westerlands and Hand of the King, Tywin Lannister sieged the castle holding King Aerys, but did not advance for fear of the king's life. After 6 months in captivity and with Tywin ready to storm the castle with the king's son Prince Rhaegar, Sir Barristan Selmy, the now famed Kingsguard, offered to sneak in and rescue the king by himself, which he did because he's amazing. Aerys had the Darklands utterly decimated in the aftermath though, almost to a man, with only one being spared, a man named Dontos Hollard. In the days after his rescue, Aerys, his sanity all but eroded, suspected his eldest son Rhaegar of trying to use the kidnapping to conveniently usurp him among many other things. He cast out Tywin as his hand and made his eldest son and heir Jaime Lannister a Kingsguard to spite him, and to further spite him, he denied Tywin's request to marry his daughter Cersei to Prince Rhaegar, believing Tywin just a schemer, which, he's not wrong. In the years that followed, Aerys became increasingly paranoid, not letting anyone touch or come near him, his hair and fingernails growing to grotesque lengths for fear someone would slit his throat while unawares. From 277 to 281 AC, therefore, the king refused to leave the Red Keep and became obsessed with a substance known as wildfire, which is said to mimic the devastation of dragonfire. He used this to execute his supposed enemies, many of which were lords of major and minor houses alike. So, not a great dude at this point. Now, we've already mentioned a few of the major figures here, Prince Rhaegar, Aerys II, Tywin, and so on, but there's still a few more we have to cover to fully elaborate the details of this rebellion. So let's start with the namesake of the rebellion himself. Robert Baratheon, or Bobby B, as he is affectionately known in the fandom, is the Lord of Storm's End, and an absolute Chad of a knight, wielding a massive great hammer as his weapon of choice. At the time of the rebellion, he was betrothed to a woman named Lyanna Stark, daughter of Lord Rickard of Winterfell, Lord of the North. Lyanna is the youngest sister of Lord Eddard, or Ned Stark, Robert's childhood friend, both having been wards of the Lord of the Vale, Jon Arryn, during their youth. Despite being the middle son of Lord Rickard, Ned is the current in-game Lord of the North. We'll get to why in a second. Although there's a couple of important events here, like the marriage of Rhaegar to Princess Aelia of Dorne and the birth of their first child Rhaenys, the most important of them happens in 281 AC, the tourney at Harrenhal. Held at the supposedly cursed but massive castle of Harrenhal by Lord Walter Went, the tournament was the greatest of its age, lasting 10 days and hosting a great amount of the realm's nobility. Some suspected it was originally intended to drum up support for Prince Rhaegar against his father, but this possibility was thwarted by King Aerys himself when he came to attend the tournament in person, this being the first time he had left the Red Keep since his kidnapping. While a lot happens during this short span of time, only two things are majorly important. 1. Prince Rhaegar defeats Sir Barristan Selmy in the final joust, while Robert wins the melee. 2. Rhaegar, having grown fond of her during the preceding days of the tournament, scandalously crowns Robert's betrothed Lyanna Stark as the Queen of Love and Beauty of the tournament over his own wife, Aelia, enraging Robert and causing no small amount of commotion. Ned also became friends with Howland Reed of the Neck during this time as well, the Neck being the most southern point of the northern regions, which is important for an event that may pop up in-game at the Tower of Joy, but I'll say no more about that here as it's not pertinent to your understanding of the present conflict. The rest of the events leading to the war happened fairly quickly from here. At the beginning of 282, Rhaegar abducts Lyanna Stark, although more than likely the two eloped near Harrenhal. Lyanna's eldest brother, Brandon Stark, already heading south for his wedding to the Lord of the Riverlands, Lord Hoster Tully's daughter, Catelyn, immediately marches to King's Landing and demands Lyanna be returned, only to be captured by the Mad King. Rhaegar and Lyanna, for those wondering, are not there, and most would not see Lyanna alive again, save Ned Stark at the Tower of Joy. Lord of the North Rickard Stark, also on his way south to his son's wedding, rides to King's Landing to demand his son be released, but he too is arrested. Lord Rickard demands a trial by combat, to which the Mad King agrees. However, King Aerys names his champion as Fire, and has Rickard and Brandon executed by wildfire, along with a few other lords, making Ned Stark the new Lord of the North. Ned also becomes betrothed to Catelyn Tully around this time, due to a previous agreement of her father with the Starks. King Aerys, following the execution of Lord Rickard, sends a letter to the Lord of the Vale, Jon Arryn, demanding he send the heads of his former lords, Robert Baratheon and Lord Eddard Stark, as he believes them to be traitors. Outraged, the Lord of the Vale calls his banners to war, with Lord Eddard and Lord Robert following suit. Thus, the rebellion began. The rest, of course, is up to you. Now, this is a very summarized interpretation of these events. Even now, I shudder to think of what I may have butchered somewhere along the way, despite my best effort to maintain a modicum of accuracy. But hopefully this is a good place for you to begin your own investigations and to maybe watch a few of those hour-long lore videos, should that strike your fancy. This should be, as the title states, almost everything you need to know to load up the game and recognize the major players, even if you never watch another lore video again. But honestly, I hope you do decide to watch and read more, because not only is the world of Ice and Fire a place rich with histories and lore, but it's also just fun to talk with other fans about. We may never get a conclusion to our story, but we love this series, and we'd love to have you. But that's all I have for this one. Thanks again to all the wonderful artists, the wiki, and George R. R. Martin. This video would not exist without your work. I hope I did it justice in my presentation. If you did like this video, maybe consider leaving a like or a comment to let YouTube know you enjoyed it, but if not, you can just pass on through. I appreciate you either way. As always, I'm Soul. This has been a Game of Thrones lore video, and I hope to see you in the next one.